How the Prince of Wales broke the news to his sons and how they reacted will remain between the three of them, though the memory of it will no doubt haunt him until the day he dies. Suffice to say that in a lifetime spent comforting the bereaved and being steadfast in the face of tragedy, nothing could have come close to the pain of that moment. Any parent who has ever had to tell their unsuspecting children that the woman who gave them life will never be coming home will share his pain. Just as any child who has been sat down by a red-eyed, tear-stained father and told their mother is dead will identify with William and Harry. The gut-wrenching shock, the terror, the disbelief, the impossible concept that the mother they adore will never again light up the room with her laughter, never again hold her arms wide for a reassuring hug, never again ruffle their hair, will never again be there is too much to absorb. And for Charles too. For all the difficulties and exasperation and anger he sometimes felt towards his ex-wife, she was the mother of his children and as such he had always loved her and continued to worry about her. They had even started talking civilly again since their divorce, and she had been much more reasonable. She was always in his prayers. His faith runs deep and has always been an important part of his makeup. He will have drawn on it on that terrible day and no doubt used it to comfort his children. He firmly believes in life after death and sees death as the next great journey in our existence, a mystery and a painful parting but not something to fear. As he once said at a Macmillan Fund anniversary, the seasons of the year provided for our ancestors a lesson which could not be ignored. That life is surely followed by death, but also that death can be seen as a doorway to renewed life. In Christianity, the message is seen in the mystery of resurrection, and in the picture of Christ as a seed dying in the ground in order to produce the new life that supplies bread and sustenance. Diana also believed in life after death. She frequently consulted mediums and clairvoyants, and she was quite certain that her paternal grandmother, Cynthia, Lady Spencer, who had died in 1972 when Diana was a child, kept guard over her in the spirit world. William, newly confirmed, will also have had his faith to draw on. He too will have understood that life on earth is just the beginning and that death is no more than a temporary separation from those we love. But no amount of belief can take away the agony of loss, the hollowness, the numbness, the inevitable rewind of last conversations, last thoughts, last memories, the what-ifs, the words left unsaid and the guilt. That morning at Balmoral, everyone's focus was on William and Harry and how best to help them get through the day and handle their feelings of loss. They were surrounded by a loving and supportive and probably rather inspirational group of people, and both boys were very close to their grandparents. Their grandmother has always found grief difficult to handle, but the Duke of Edinburgh will have been a pillar of strength to them both. His early life was punctuated by loss. By the age of 17, his mother had been admitted to a mental asylum. His father had virtually disappeared from his life. One of his sisters and her entire family had been killed in a plane crash, and his guardian and favorite uncle had died of cancer. For all his bluff exterior, he understood grief. William said he wanted to go to church, to talk to Mummy, and Harry and he were as one. So the Queen took the boys and the rest of the family to the little kirk at Crathy, where she is a regular Sunday morning worshipper while at Balmoral. For those who have been brought up with religion in their lives, as they all had, there is something deeply comforting in the traditional ritual and language of a church service. The secular media didn't see it that way. They were outraged that Diana's children should have been taken to church. One newspaper called it a public relations exercise, and they were even more outraged that the minister should have made no mention of the princess in his prayers. And they blamed the Queen for it. The Reverend Robert Sloane, rightly or wrongly, had decided it might be less upsetting for Diana's sons if he didn't mention her name. My thinking, he told reporters, was that the children had been wakened just a few hours before and told of their mother's death. What irked the media the most was that not one member of the royal family displayed so much as a wobbling chin on their outing to church. Diana's death was perceived as a national tragedy, and in a week that saw the most unprecedented, and to some, entirely incomprehensible, outpouring of public grief, the nation, encouraged by the media, wanted to see and hear from the Queen. At every other national disaster, she or a member of her family were the first to visit, the first to offer words of commiseration and comfort, and to be present alongside ordinary people, doing what royals do best, spearheading national sentiment, representing the nation to itself. And yet, in this greatest hour of need, there was no sign of them. And there was no indication that they were as grief-stricken as the rest of the country. In the remoteness of the Scottish Highlands, wrapped up in the needs of two fragile young boys, and pulling together as a family, their antennae for the mood elsewhere in the country were not functioning as they normally do. The Queen, rationally but mistakenly, viewed it as a private tragedy and decided her priority was her grandsons. And in human terms, who is to say she was wrong? The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, got it right. That Sunday morning he paid a moving tribute to Diana that entirely caught the mood of the nation. His voice cracking with emotion, he said, "I feel like everyone else in this country. I am utterly devastated. We are a nation in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief. It is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain and throughout the world, with joy and with comfort. She was the people's princess, and that is how she will remain in our hearts and memories forever." Whatever the psychological and sociological explanations for the nation's reaction to Diana's death might be, there was not only grief but also anger on the streets of London. Some of it was directed at the tabloid press, for paying huge sums of money for paparazzi photographs, conveniently forgetting that if the tabloid reading public didn't buy the tabloids there would be no paparazzi. Some of the anger was directed at the royal family, so clearly out of touch and anachronistic in modern Britain, and the rest was directed at Charles. One of his first thoughts on hearing the news of Diana's death was that he would be blamed, and he was right. While William and Harry had been with their father, Diana had gone back to the south of France, and she and Dodi had spent the previous 9 days on Jonacle. The photographs of them entwined were what had led the columnists in London to sharpen their pens. On their way back to London, they had stopped in Paris for the night, where Dodi's father owned the Ritz Hotel, and also an apartment. The accident happened as they were being driven from one to the other. In an attempt to fool the paparazzi, a decoy car had sped away from the front entrance of the hotel, while Dodi and Diana left from the back, but they were soon spotted and a chase ensued. No blame was ever leveled at Dodi, or even his father, who had provided the car. It was his employee, Henri Paul, the chauffeur, who had been driving well over the speed limit when he hit the Alma underpass. None of them had been wearing seatbelts, and Paul was killed at the wheel. An 18-month French judicial investigation concluded that it was he, and not the paparazzi, who was to blame for the crash. He had a cocktail of alcohol, antidepressants and traces of a tranquilizing antipsychotic drug in his blood and should never have been behind the wheel of a car that night. In the meantime, Mohammed Al-Fayed did nothing to stop rumors that the pair were about to announce their engagement, and there were false rumors that Diana was pregnant. He also shared his own private theory about the crash with the media. It was, he suggested, a conspiracy cooked up by the Duke of Edinburgh and the British security services to assassinate Diana so that she would not marry Dodi, because such a marriage would have given William, second in line to the throne, a Muslim stepfather. All these allegations and more would be dealt with in subsequent inquiries and inquests. But for the time being, there was a funeral to be arranged and a public relations disaster to be averted, one which threatened the very existence of the monarchy.